We have here two guests from the UK that presented this morning, but there wasn't really a chance to make a discussion. And I'm speaking in English. I assume that everybody here is okay with that. These two people are in core subjects of quality management. We have Antonella Addams from the B.S.I, which actually for decades leads the standardization process. And if you want to know what's ahead in terms of standardization, we can learn a lot from her. So what we'll do is we'll give her here the chance to present very briefly what she presented this morning, to summarize what she presented this morning about the standardization in the B.S.I and things that are on the way, and we can ask her a question and have a short discussion, and she would be followed by Maurice Cox, which also presented this morning. He's from the GAM, and he's also in an institution that is well known, well respected, and influences the way institutions work in the measurement area. So Antonella, come on up, and I beg the people to have patience and just stay for a couple of more minutes.
I don't know how many of you were here for the morning session, and I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but I just wanted to give you a very brief overview of who I am and what I talked about in the morning session. My name is Antonella Addams, and I'm an international program manager at the British Standards Institution in London. My specific area of interest is statistics, quality management systems, and ICT especially. So software systems and e-accessibility. So this morning I came in with two very clear briefs. One was to give an update on the main revisions that have happened in the last year or that are still happening. So I talked about what's happening in ISO 9001, which is forecast for publication in 2015. So basically, the idea of risk-based thinking in ISO 9001 as a vehicle for opportunity rather than risk being seen as a negative thing. And I gave a brief update on other changes and changes to requirements. I am told that if you would like to see my PowerPoint presentation, Dr. Benson would be more than happy to hand it out. That's not to say that I thought it was amazing, but it contains quite a lot more information that I'm able to give you now. Then I spoke about ISO 27001, which is the information security standard. This was published a couple of months ago, a revision from the 2005 version, and just the kind of really good changes that make 27001 a standard that would make your business even more trustworthy in terms of information management. I went on to talk about 14001, and then one standard that was I was particularly excited to discuss was the new occupational health and safety standards, which is ISO 45001. The reason why I decided to mention it wasn't because it was perhaps particularly relevant to this audience, but it was because this standard was 30 years in the making, and finally in late 2013 ISO and B.S.I kicked off a meeting to make it happen. So the other kind of brief I had for today was to talk about the importance of influencing future generation of standards users and standard makers through a link between standards institutions and universities, or even high schools, or even primary schools. So I just briefly discussed about how B.S.I have got a system in place called Speakers Network, which goes out to schools and university to basically talk about how standards can make careers better, what they can do for students and for their future. I gave a brief introduction about the standard process, how it's managed, the idea of the standards are made by consensus, which is really important because that kind of goes to prove that they don't necessarily further one party's interest over another. And I talked about how we make standards and how we're connected to ISO and CEN. So that was basically a very shortened version of about 40 minutes of talk this morning. So, hello.
I wanted to say that I was quite surprised because I thought that ISO of 2015 would go would get closer to business and talk about business excellence. And you were talking that the main issue or the main change that is going to be is talking about risk management.
Oh, in 9001.
Yeah. And what happened to the process, to the organizational excellence?
I don't know. What I said to you this morning was what ISO gave to me to come in. Well, ISO, the program manager at B.S.I, gave to me to present. I don't deal with 9001, so any specific question I won't be able to answer. But I can give you the name of the person who would definitely be able to answer that. And she usually goes out to kind of talk about the changes that. So I'd be more than happy to. I've given you my card. If you email me, I'll give you your email address. So I'm really sorry not to be able to answer very specific questions on those standards, but what do you mean specifically, like getting rid of the standards and replacing them with regulations? Is that, or oh,
as it is, not replacing
yeah,
it by something else.
yeah, or just making do?
There is a surplus of regulations, and maybe it's bad for the economy. Maybe it's bad for and it kind of prevents the regulation and standards.
I spoke, I don't know if you were here this morning, but I kind of made the point that standards and regulations have to be seen as two completely separate entities. Standards are entirely voluntary, and somebody made the good point that some standards really have to be adopted for good business practice. So, you know, voluntary, I'm going to use in inverted commas, but and then there's regulation, and some standards are called in within the regulations, but those as far as I'm concerned, 2 points. One is obviously the separation between those two things, and the other thing would be that we try and work and align our work program, and I can only really speak for British standards, as closely as we can with the government priority areas, so that what you're mentioning, if I understand it correctly, doesn't happen, so that we're kind of working along similar lines rather than, you know, kind of, I could tell you some stories. Yeah, I could tell you some stories.
It's an opportunity to hear another side.
Yeah.
I'll never get by just reading the formal explanation. I'm very curious.
It's interesting.
Behind the scenes.
Well, I'll start from like the kind of basic level is who you've asked who sits on those committees, and say a committee is created that doesn't exist before, we would look at the organizations or trade associations closely connected to the field. We'd write to them and say, well, do you want to elect somebody to come and sit on a committee? So they would come up with a name. If a committee is already in existence, my job is to then take that name with a brief resume or CV, circulate it around the committee for a week to make sure there is consensus in whoever comes onto the committee. Everybody agrees, that person gets put on. If there isn't a trade, or if otherwise trade association, organization, could be government, could be academia. The bureaucracy is the same. You write to me saying your organization is electing you, or your university would like you to sit on that particular committee. I would have to do the same thing, circulate your name and details, and why you want to sit on that committee. What are you hoping to bring to the whole committee? They would object or not. If there are no objections, I will put you on. And one of the things that we really insist on is, even though committee members are, people appointed to working groups are expected to travel abroad to ISO to bring the UK view to ISO, it's very important that you attend our national meetings. So that's one of the things that behind the scenes causes a little bit of a problem, because you get a lot of people saying, I want to sit on a committee, I have got something to say, I can bring this to the table, and you think this is brilliant. And 99% of the time they really do. And like I said, I call them the backbone of excellence, because committees really are. But because they do it voluntarily, there are problems in terms of their own time. They have to do it in their own time. They have to, nationally, they have to fund their own travel. So even if you live in Edinburgh and you want to come to a meeting in London, I can't support your travel. I can only support your travel if you're traveling abroad to ISO. So it would have to be out of your own pocket and your own time that you have to come to national meeting. This isn't always possible. So I would say, this morning I talked about how difficult it is sometimes to achieve consensus, but actually harder than that is to really make sure everybody gets into the room, at the same time, so that consensus can be achieved in the here and now, rather than then doing it by email. But obviously these are people who sometimes don't know each other. Sometimes, as Morris knows, because he sits on a B.S.I committee, he chairs one actually, people have known each other for a long time. Sometimes people don't know each other. Sometimes people don't get on. Sometimes their interests are completely different. And it's my job to maintain the fair balance of the discussion. And that's, I think, is one of the hardest bits of my job. So, yeah.
There was agreement, remember?
The consensus, yeah. Yeah, there has to be, it's not a question of unanimity, but there has to be agreement. Whatever we take forward as the UK view has to be agreed within the committee. So say you don't agree, but all these other people agree. If you just kind of say, I don't agree, but I'm happy to go with the majority, that's consensus. I don't have unanimity, but I don't have any struggle against what the majority is saying. And that, that's a big part of my job, is to make sure that can be done on time and within all those balloting deadlines, and that the standard can move on. Because if that doesn't happen, we miss an opportunity to vote. So.
Ever reach a stalemate?
Oh yeah, and then many things happen. Sometimes people bang on the tables until I've had a chairman banging on the table until some people agreed. It's I'm not telling you is no. No, you know what I do sometimes when that happens? I take them out of the room and I take them outside. So yeah, and there's a nice place, like an eating place that we have opposite B.S.I. So when that happens, I just take them all out of the meeting room and I take them all down there. And so by having and it sounds like a joke, but it works. By moving from the formal to the informal, people can just add their views and then, go back to the meeting, and suddenly, as if by magic, consensus is achieved. But there's a lot of negotiation, and you have to be, I think you've got to really like people to do my job, otherwise you get really fed up. And, it's a massive part of my job, yeah. So.
Maybe you give an indirect answer directly to Rick, because if you said it is voluntary, okay, most business people don't have time to come to those.
That's very true, yeah.
They not create any income.
Yeah.
So all those people that are going to those committees are working in the same environment as they used to do for many years. So
Yeah.
let's add risk management. Why to bother us with those businessmen who deals with business excellence? So maybe it's an indirect reason and we are coming from the hardcore
Yeah.
business. Okay,
But you know, I've heard this before, exactly what you're saying, and you will get some people in the room, and some will say, if you talk to the program manager, she's one of my colleagues who deals with 9001 directly, she thinks that there's been a massive revolution, that it's completely been, twisted upside down. But from what I hear you saying is you think not much.
No, because we are risk management.
Yeah, so you're saying it's kind of like a little bit more on the same. So I think
because we
yeah.
judge, because we judge, or make a scoring or evaluation for business organizations here, like you have the EFQA or Malcolm Baldrige in the United States, and we know what is really business excellence.
Yeah.
There's we evaluate it, and not with a very small glass of the ISO.
Yeah.
It's much wider.
Yeah.
It's not, that the ISO will close a little gap with those, excellence models, but we don't see it, and that was, I think, the reason for the question.
I think ISO should approach more to business. Sometimes it's parallel to the business processes, and they should be combined together. It's something historical.
But then equally, what I would say to all of you who've got something to say on any ISO standard, and especially 9001, which attracts a lot of comments, is I'm not exactly sure at which point next year it will come up for public comment. That means that all of you will have the chance to have a say, like I said this morning, and don't think it's a waste of time, because it's a rule. It's the law, kind of, if I can use it within inverted commas, that all those comments have to be looked at, discussed, noted. Even if we don't agree with it, even if the committee doesn't agree with it, they still have to look at it. And especially if you can put, if you look at the ISO comment template, it says, what clause have you got a problem with? What is your problem with the clause? And what is your proposed solution? So that is really your platform. And you can make general comments as well to kind of, talk about, to take this further. So,
Thank you very much.
no problem, thank you.